Greetings and welcome to the World Numismatic News as we now take a look at the top 10 wheat pennies for each decade from 1909 to 1958. The first coin comes to us by way of the Denver Mint in the form of the 1911 D over D repunched mint mark variety. As a matter of fact, the first two repunched mint mark varieties are from this date and mint mark combination, something that will become somewhat of a recurring theme during this video, as you'll soon see. The mint mark was punched slightly towards the north, leading to the initial impression being seen slightly towards the southeast, with a very nice outline of the lower curve of the D nearly 3/4 of the way around the top, and the top serif is also quite distinctly seen towards the south. To my knowledge, the best known examples of this particular variety are around the MS64 red-brown level, and in 2019 an AU50 coin from PCGS was sold for $397. And just like that, we feature the second repunched mint mark variety from the Denver Mint for 1911. This time, the coin actually features a triple punched mint mark instead, although admittedly it's not exactly the poster child for triple punched mint mark varieties, especially if your particular coin is in a later die state. The best place to really spot this particular punching would be towards the south of the top serif of the D. Then there's the second impression that is shifted dramatically towards the east of the final mint mark placement. This is an extremely difficult variety to actually come across, and in 2014 a PCGS graded coin such as this in a grade of AU55 was sold for $907. Well then, sticking with 1911 for now, but moving westwards towards the San Francisco Mint, and we encountered the 1911 S over S repunched mint mark. This time, however, the punching is slightly clearer than the previous coin, to be sure. The S mint mark was repunched almost entirely towards the right on this example, with the remnants of the initial S clearly seen towards the west on both the upper curl of the letter as well as the lower serif in much the same fashion. For this coin, an MS63 red-brown example in a PCGS slab was sold at auction in 2019 for the sum of $1,320. For the seventh coin on this list, the San Francisco Mint heeds our attention once more, although certainly not for the last time either. This time we look to find the 1910 S over S wheat cent. Here the S mint mark was repunched towards the north by quite a serious degree, leaving almost the entire lower curl with the serif completely intact of the initial placement of the S. On nicer examples of this particular coin, you should also still be able to see some leftover artifacts of the S inside the upper loop or the upper curl of the final S mint mark as well. Auction records and sales data for this particular variety are a bit thin on the ground, but in 2014, a VF25 example appears to have been sold at auction for $187 in a PCGS slab. Steadily working our way backwards from 1911 to 1910, and now we find ourselves in 1909, the coin's first year of issue, and once again the San Francisco Mint for another repunched mint mark. And yes, I promise there will be other varieties on this list other than repunched mint marks very soon. In this instance, the S mint mark is clearly doubled towards the northeast, as the final placement was ever so slightly down and to the left of the initial S. You can clearly still see almost the entire upper curl as well as the serif of the first placement, as well as the rounding of the lower curl towards the east of the final placement as well. In 2019, an example of this variety with a very attractive red coloring was sold at auction in a PCGS slab with a grade of MS66 red for the sum of $3,290. And so, nearly at the halfway mark is, as promised, not a repunched mint mark, but an actual doubled die variety in the form of the 1909 VDB double die obverse Lincoln cent. The first of two very similar varieties from this issue. On this coin, we are looking at a class 4 or offset hub doubling, where you can see this best expressed in the doubling quite unmistakably on the 1 and the first 9 of the date slightly towards the east. Further doubling is also clearer seen on the last 4 letters of Liberty, where the letters are doubled again towards the east and slightly towards the south as well. During 2018, a PCGS graded MS66 red example of this particular coin was sold at auction for a nice even $9,000. And so the fourth coin is the other 1909 VDB double die obverse example, as I mentioned just a moment ago. This time, however, the coin is not nearly as easy to spot offhand as the prior example. This time, the result of class 6 or the standard hub doubling. The first 9 of the date is slightly thicker than it really should be, and with some slight separation in higher grade coins. Look towards the tail of the 9 to spot this most clearly. The upright strokes of the letters of Liberty are also considerably thicker than they really should normally be. To aid in identification, there are also die chips in the B and the R of Liberty for quite a few examples of this variety, although it should be noted that these are by no means a surefire identification. 2019 saw the auction of a PCGS graded MS67 red example that sold for the final price of $11,750. Then we head back again to 1910 for the last time on this list to examine one of the more popular repunched mint mark varieties from this entire decade, really. The 1910 S over S Lincoln cent. This coin is almost the exact opposite as the previous 1910 S over S that we looked at in the number 7 slot on this list, in that the initial mint mark was placed significantly towards the north of the final placement as indicated here. For this coin, we look to a 2018 auction where a PCGS graded MS67 red coin was sold for $19,200. Second to last, we have a coin that has been discussed quite a bit by, well, just about everyone who is interested in the subject, I'm sure. The 1909 S over horizontal S repunched mint mark variety. So yeah, it's basically all in the name. On this particular coin, the initial S was actually punched in with a horizontal orientation. It was on its side, basically. So in order to correct this mistake, the mint mark had to be repunched, but this time in the right way up. This left the telltale signs of the first striking towards the top of the final mint mark. Earlier die state examples do display this particular aspect much clearer, but regardless of the die state, you should be able to see some indication of the first horizontal S. For this popular variety, a 2018 auction saw a PCGS graded MS67 red example sell for the price of $24,000. And then all that is left is the top of the class, so to speak, which undoubtedly has to be the 1917 double die obverse Lincoln penny. There is very strong and clear doubling on this coin, best expressed on the date where all of the numbers of 1917 display doubling towards the southwest. The letters of In God We Trust are all also doubled, but this particular aspect is best seen on the word trust. Here, the letters should be doubled with unmistakable effect towards the right, perfectly expressing the counterclockwise rotation that occurred during the hubbing process, resulting in this variety. In March of 2019, the finest known 1917 double die obverse penny with a grade of MS67 plus red from PCGS was sold at auction for $120,000.
$1,000. A very attractive but little discussed repunched mint mark variety from 1928. The 1928 S over S coin is marred by its exclusion from the popular Cherry Picker's Guide, despite its inclusion in Konikka's Top 100 list, and as a result, PCGS does not recognize this variety as of yet, even though NGC and Anox will gladly attribute the coin for you. The final placement is southeast of the initial punching, resulting in a very nice doubling of the upper curl of the S towards the northwest, as seen here, as well as the same effect on the lower serif of the S as well. This coin would gladly sell for anywhere between $50 and $300 depending on the grade of the individual coin in question. Then another repunched mint mark variety, but this time it stems from the Denver Mint in the 1927 D over D variety. Here, the D mint mark is placed directly north, creating a rather unmistakable effect towards the top of the mint mark, as well as doubling towards the lower serif. An interesting anomaly on this coin as well is some slight doubling that can be seen on Lincoln's eye as well, just towards the right of the lower eyelid. In late 2019, during a rare coin auction in the Bellagio in Las Vegas, a PCGS graded MS64 red-brown example of this variety was sold for $1,175 at auction. For the next coin, we head to 1925, and the first and probably the least spectacular double die variety, if I'm being completely honest. This is, however, a very nice example of Class 6, or the standard hub doubling, which can be quite easy to miss if you are not paying close enough attention or simply don't know what to look for, as most of the doubling simply displays as nothing more than extreme additional thickness on the letters. And the most noticeable place to spot this variety would be on the date itself, especially on the tail end of the 9, or the lower halves of the 2 and the 5 of 1925. In 2016 though, a PCGS graded MS65 brown example of this type was sold at auction for $1,116. And lucky number 7 is the 1927 double die obverse Lincoln Cent. Here we have some moderate doubling to the obverse as a result of Class 1 hub doubling with a slight clockwise rotation. The result is seen on the first few letters of Liberty and the last several numbers on the date. However, the best place to identify this variety will be on the letters of In God We Trust. Here, you can see the doubling towards the left of most all of the letters in question. Later die states for this particular coin do become more difficult to diagnose, so just keep that in mind as well. Quite a popular variety in its own right though. Early in 2020, a PCGS graded MS64 red example was sold at auction for the sum of $1,527. Nearly at the halfway point on this list, and we head to the end of the decade now to find a 1929 S over S repunched mint mark variety. The repunching on the mint mark is fairly straightforward and was punched directly to the south of the initial impression, as that striking was simply too high and thusly too close to the date. The remnant of the first S can now be seen only directly towards the top of the S mint mark. A fun little diagnostic for this variety that can be seen on all examples, but is definitely more visible on some, is a clash mark on the reverse of the self-same mint mark, just under the M of unum and towards the top left of the right wheat stalk. This is actually quite a difficult variety coin to track down, and in 2019 a PCGS graded MS65 red example was sold at auction for $1,821. And then from there, again to 1925, where we have almost the exact opposite of the coin from the listing before. This is again an S over S repunched mint mark, but this time the second impression was placed towards the north, with the first mint mark being simply too low instead. What's left of the initial striking can be detected directly towards the south of the final S mint mark, and judging from how bold the remaining elements of the S in fact are, it must have been quite a strong impression to begin with. Again, a fairly popular variety, and in March of 2018 a PCGS graded MS64 red example was sold at auction for the sum of $1,920. The next penny variety is one from 1928 and is not a double die or a repunched mint mark as you might have come to expect, but rather it is the 1928 large S variety. That's right, the S mint mark on this coin is of a distinctly different style than the one that was usually in use. As the name implies, the S is significantly larger than the S on the normal or the small s coin. The easiest way to spot this, if you don't have another coin to compare it to, is to look towards the serifs of the S that are shaped very differently from the normal small s mint mark. This is an interesting variety, and more collectors are beginning to pay attention to things like mint mark styles as well. In 2019, a PCGS graded MS65 red example of this type was sold at auction for $5,875. Okay, so I maybe cheated a little bit on this one, where the number 3, 2, and 1 spots are all different coins, but are subtly different varieties of the 1922 penny. You see, in 1922, the economy was struggling, and demand for circulating coins was at a low point for the era. In fact, the only mint striking pennies was Denver. So, from that, all 1922 pennies should by rights have a D mint mark. However, some do not, and these are known as the 1922 no D or even weak D coins. Die pair number 3 is what is known as a weak D variety. On this coin, the D mint mark should be all but obliterated, with only the very faintest of outline remaining, positioned just barely south-southwest towards the first 2 in 1922. This obverse should also then be paired with a very badly worn reverse die as seen here. Even in higher numerical grades, this coin will have almost no details on the wheat stalks and the motto of E pluribus unum, which should barely be legible due to the badly worn die. During 2019, one of these weak D coins was sold at auction in a PCGS slab with a grade of MS63 red-brown for $1,320. Then we move on to die pair number 1. This coin should have no trace of the D mint mark whatsoever, whether due to a filled die cavity, wear or abrasion, or a bizarre combination of the lot. This is the 1922 no D variety. The major distinction between this and the next coin on this list is that it still shares the same worn reverse die marriage as the previous coin, which is why it is also called the no D weak reverse 1922 cent. For this type, a PCGS graded MS64 red example was sold in 2019 for $22,800. And then we have die pair number 2 for the 1922 no D penny. On this coin, we have an obverse that has absolutely no trace of any D mint mark, a die that was obviously polished and sharpened in places, most noticeably on the last 2 of 1922. And this is all paired with a clearly fresh and crisp new reverse die, earning it the moniker of the 1922 no D strong reverse cent. This is by far the most desirable of really any of the 1920s variety coins, and is always in high demand in the market. And in 2018, one of these was sold at auction in a PCGS slab with a given grade of MS64 red-brown for the sum of $63,000. Relatively late in the decade, we look at the 1938 S penny with a repunched mint mark. In fact, repunched mint marks look to fill up about half of this list overall. On this coin though, the S mint mark is produced directly to the south of the original position, which appears to have been placed slightly askew from its intended positioning. You should be able to see the upper loop of the S peeking out from behind the final mint mark. Die state is, however, a factor and should also be considered here, as earlier die state examples are without a doubt clearer, and conversely later die state coins will not display as dramatically. In 2018, a 1938 S over S penny in a PCGS slab with a grade of MS66 plus red was sold at auction for $109. Then we have another repunched mint mark, and again it is from 1938, but this time it hails from the Denver Mint instead. On this variety, the initial D was struck slightly to the west of the final placement, causing the straight bar of the D as well as the top serif to protrude slightly from behind the final D. The same is also true inside the cavity of the D, where the inner rounding can be seen as indicated here. During a 2020 coin auction, a coin like this with a grade of PCGS MS65 red was sold for the sum of $111.63. For the next variety coin, we look to the very beginning of the decade with the 1930 S over S coin, and yes, it is in fact another repunched mint mark. For this coin, the final placement of the S was directly south of the initial striking, and the result is that the top of the secondary S can be seen directly towards the north of the primary mint mark. The effect is quite unmistakable, but can be more subtle at times as well. In 2016, an MS64 red graded coin from PCGS was sold at auction for the amount of $124. And then, in the number 7 position, is what I'd say is easily the rarest coin on this list overall, and also the first double die variety to boot, the 1934 double die obverse. This is a rather interesting case, which is characterized by the remnants of the highest points of the numbers 9 and 3, appearing in the fields just southwest of the date. Other minor doubling and also a few die markers do exist to confirm the variety, but this is the main place of interest. It appears that since the offset was so significant that the press operator realized his mistake before full pressure was applied. He was then able to adjust the hub onto the die before completing the hubbing process. In 2014, Great Collections sold an example of this coin at auction in a PCGS slab with a grade of F15 for $248. And then we have another repunched mint mark coin, but unlike most of the repunched mint mark varieties mentioned up to this point, this one is surprisingly difficult to track down. Not impossible, mind you, but it does begin to pose a significant challenge. The May 1930 D over D penny sees the Denver Mint's D mint mark restruck directly south of its initial placement, with only a slight remnant of the first impression remaining as proof of its existing directly to the top. Examining the auction record, we have to go back all the way to 2012 when Stax Bowers sold an example of this coin with a grade of AU50 from PCGS for $851. And then, neatly at the halfway point, we examine the 1939 double-die obverse Lincoln cent. Although the spread on this variety is extremely strong, it does not display in a very dramatic fashion, as the initial hubbing attempt seems to have been rather weak. For this variety, look towards the date to see the spread in the 1 as well as the first 9 of 1939. Lincoln's eyelid is also doubled quite dramatically towards the north. Other places of interest include his ear, the letters of In God We Trust, and the letters of liberty, with the doubling becoming ever more apparent on those letters as you move closer to Lincoln's bust. In 2019, a coin like this with a PCGS slab and a grade of MS67 plus red was sold at auction for $2,350. And then, as we move closer to the top position, the varieties do, rather predictably, become more renowned and sought after. A perfect example of this is this 1935 double-die obverse specimen, where we do have some moderate but very eye-pleasing pivoted hub doubling. The date is once again the best place to look for this coin, as basically all of the numbers are double to some degree, but the 3 as well as the 5 of 1935 do in fact stand out. The We Trust portion of In God We Trust is also of particular interest in this case, with doubling nicely towards the left of all of the letters. In 2019, an MS67 red graded example from PCGS was sold at auction for $3,055. Then to 1934, with the final repunched mint mark to appear on this list, in the form of the 1934 D over D Wheateous cent. For this coin, the D was again placed directly south of the initial impression, but here, almost the entire first punching is still visible, with both the top of the D, including the top serif, but also inside the cavity of the D, where the bottom part of the first impression should still be discernible, as well as the bottom serif just towards the left of the straight bar. A very neat effect, if I have to say so. In terms of market value, we find a PCGS graded coin with a grade of MS67 red that was sold at auction in 2018 for $3,745. And then, for the top 2 positions, we have a pair of coins, both from 1936, and both double-die obverse varieties. The coin that we are looking at right now is the FS102 type, and the best place to spot this would be to examine the date. There should be clear doubling on the date, resulting in doubling that displays towards the southwest on all of the numbers of 1936. Then, to distinguish this coin from the next one on this list, go towards Liberty. Pay particular attention to the R, where you see one of the working hubs for 1936 had a broken leg on the R of Liberty. It appears as though this coin's die was first impressed by that particular hub, and then received a second squeezing using a different hub with a normal R, resulting in what we see here. During 2019, a PCGS graded MS65 plus red example of this particular variety coin was sold at auction during the August ANA show for $3,600. And then to the number 1 position is the other 1936 double-die obverse variety, the first and definitely most prominent amongst its siblings. Here again the date should immediately draw your attention, but this time the doubling displays to the northeasterly direction instead. The hallmark of the previous coin is not quite so apparent here, but the word liberty is very nicely doubled overall instead. What's more, the letters of "In God We Trust" are also quite nicely doubled as well. This is a very sought after red book listed variety that should be really on everybody's watch list. In 2018, a PCGS graded MS65 red coin with a very attractive luster indeed was sold at auction for $8,400. A repunched mint mark from the Denver Mint in the form of the 1947 S/S wheat cent. Now, the fact that this is a repunched mint mark is significant enough, but what makes this coin so interesting is the fact that there are in fact two distinct mint mark styles being used for each impression. The initial striking took place with a trumpet tail S, or what is known as mint mark style number 4. Then, when the repunching took place, the primary S was placed using a mint mark style number 7, or what is better known as the sans serif S, leaving this unique variety for us to discover today. Remnants of the bottom, but especially to the top serif, can still be detected under the primary S, with a peculiar artifact at the top loop of the S, indicating the placement of the initial mint mark. In June of 2019, an MS67 red graded coin like this was sold at auction in a PCGS slab for the price of $780. The next coin is another remarkable specimen, a true double variety that is both a double die obverse and a repunched mint mark variety at the same time. Not only that, but the mint mark was actually triple struck to form the 1942 S/S/S double die obverse Lincoln cent. So, let's start with the mint mark, shall we? The placement of the initial and secondary marks get a bit muddled, but suffice to say that in relation to the placement of the final S, look towards the lower loop for the most obvious signs of the repunching, both inside the curl and just towards the northwest of the lower serif should be very clear indications of this variety coin. The doubling here is less dramatic, but important nonetheless. The date is best represented by the 9 in this case, with the letters of "In God We Trust" being moderately doubled towards the northwest, exemplified by the letters of "In God." And then liberty sees some nice spread as well. Here you can best see the doubling by looking at the T and the Y, again directly towards the north. Examining the auction records for this type, we find a PCGS graded MS66 plus red example sold in 2018 for $840. And then the next two slots are both occupied by the steel pennies of 1943. First of these is a native of the San Francisco Mint with the 1943 S double die obverse Lincoln cent. Here, the offset hub doubling is represented best by the doubling in the 1 as well as the 9 of the date. There are other indications as well to confirm your find, such as the doubling on the bow tie, for instance, which runs all along the bottom profile. There should also be very clear doubling on Lincoln's eye, with the entire eye as well as the upper and lower eyelids doubled nicely towards the east. There's also other, more subtle doubling as well, but these should be enough to identify this variety. And in 2019, an MS67 plus graded coin from PCGS was sold at auction for $1,527. And then another 1943 double die obverse penny, but this time from the Philadelphia Mint, so no mint mark for this one. Now this is likely to be the best example of what you are likely to find to represent the standard hub doubling. It is best seen on the date again, where all of the numbers, but especially the 1 and the 9 of 1943, show extreme additional thickness. By way of example, the coin on your left is an example of what the normal 1943 penny should look like, and on your right is the double die variety under discussion here. Note how all of the numbers are completely distended and look sort of bloated. In 2019, one of these coins was sold at auction in a PCGS slab with a grade of MS67 for $1,586. Heading deeper into the decade now with the second coin from 1947, but this time it is the 1947 double die obverse variety instead. On an interesting side note, this variety was only discovered in the mid-1990s, which actually goes to prove that just because a variety coin isn't listed, that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. So keep searching, maybe the next big discovery will be yours. The rotated hub doubling is present on most of the letters, but is best spotted on the date, where the 4, but especially the 7, is noticeably doubled towards the top. As mentioned, most of the letters show some medium doubling, but the word trust best exemplifies this, where the slight clockwise rotation of the second hubbing can be clearly noticed towards the west of the letters. During the 2016 Central State Show, a PCGS graded MS67 red coin like this was sold at auction for $3,055. Then we take a look at the first of the overmint marks, neatly at the halfway point on this list. The coin in question is the 1946 S over D wheat cent. In this coin, the S mint mark was struck directly over, but slightly towards the north of the original placement of the D. The top rounding of the original D is still seen inside the loop of the S, with the straight bar of the D connecting the lower serif of the S with the upper loop as well. This is quite a sought after red book listed variety, an example of which was sold in 2019 coin auction graded as MS66 plus red by PCGS for the sum of $3,172. Moving closer to the proverbial finish line, we visit the 1941 series. Now, for the plethora of varieties that exist for this issue, one of the best is this particular double die obverse coin, which is best characterized by the prominent doubling on Lincoln's ear, which leads some collectors to refer to this as the 1941 double ear variety. Although strictly speaking, only the earlobe is noticeably affected by this, as you can clearly see here. Additional doubling is also present on the 1 and the 9 of the date, where a ghosting effect can be seen towards the southwest. You can also clearly see a similar effect on the T as well as the Y of Liberty. During 2019, an MS66 plus red graded coin from PCGS was again sold at auction for the fairly impressive sum of $6,168. And then, in the third spot is the first of two very different repunch, or should I perhaps say overmint mark varieties for 1944, in the form of the 1944 D over S coin. In this, the somewhat more plentiful example of these two, a small portion of the upper loop of the original S mint mark can still be detected towards the left of the straight bar of the D, just around the center mark. Now, in earlier die state examples of this particular variety, the center portion of the S should also be discernible inside the cavity of the D. However, this does fade in later die states, so it is not an absolute indicator for the variety. During the 2019 ANA's World's Fair of Money, a PCGS graded MS67 plus red coin like this was sold at auction for $8,400. In the second position, we head back to 1943 for the steel penny and one of the most blatantly unmistakable repunched mint mark varieties known, the 1943 D over D zinc-coated steel Lincoln penny. This is a repunched mint mark that you truly could spot even without the aid of magnification, as the initial D was placed well towards the southwest of the final placement, with most of the original punching still visible. An extremely difficult variety to locate, but at the same time an extremely easy one to sell, as was the case in 2018 when a PCGS graded MS67 example was sold at auction for $10,200. And so, in the top position for this particular decade rests yet another over mint mark variety for 1944. Again, this is a D over S variety, but this coin varies quite a bit from the coin in the third position that we looked at just a while ago. Here, the original S mint mark was punched directly towards the north of the final D, with the upper loop of the S still projecting up from behind the D. If you see a 1944 D over S penny referenced in a price guide, chances are that this is the very coin that they are discussing, as it is extremely rare and very sought after by collectors. To illustrate this, here is an example that was sold at auction in 2019 in a PCGS graded holder with a grade of MS67 red that raised $35,250. Now, any listing of rare 1940s pennies would hardly be complete without at least mentioning the next two coins. Technically, error coins and not varieties, as they were off-metal coins struck on the wrong type of planchet from their intended use. But by way of honorable mention, here are the 1943 bronze as well as the 1944 steel pennies. Both of these coins were struck on the wrong type of metal, with the 1943 intended to be only steel and the 1944 reverting back to bronze or copper as it is more commonly called. Both were struck by mistake at all three working mints of San Francisco, Philadelphia, and Denver. For the 1944 steel coin, only two genuine examples are known to exist from the San Francisco Mint, with the auction record being set in 2008, when the MS66 graded example from PCGS was sold for $373,750. And whenever a 1943 bronze penny becomes available on the market, it usually attains several $100,000 at auction. But the record was set in 2010 when a PCGS graded MS64 brown graded coin like this, the only known example of its kind from the Denver Mint, was sold via private treaty for the record sum of $1.7 million. An impressive repunched mint mark in the form of a 1956 D over D variety where the two mint marks are completely separated from each other. In this example, you can see that the initial D was placed too low on the design, as it is completely south of the final placement. Only a faint remnant of this still remains, as attempts were clearly made to remove it from the die. As such, an earlier die state example would be more desirable. During 2018, one such coin graded by NGC with a grade of MS65 red was sold at auction for $240. The number 9 position is held by the only proof coin on this list. Not that there aren't many proof varieties for this decade, in fact there were quite a few. And while it is true that you aren't likely to find this variety in your pocket change, well, it's just such a unique example, I just had to include it. The coin in question is the 1953 proof Lincoln cent with a re-engraved die. This is best seen just below the date on the edge of Lincoln's vest, where the portrait was very obviously strengthened or re-engraved by hand. Apparently, just a handful of new proof cents were needed towards the end of the year, and instead of producing an entirely new proof die, some of the older, slightly worn dies were chosen and sharpened by hand, before then being pressed back into service. A very nice example of this coin was sold in 2017 in a PCGS slab with a grade of proof 65 red for the price of $152.75. Remember I said that there were some really cool repunched mint marks for this decade? Well, the coin in the number 8 position goes a step further to prove that once again. The 1955 S repunched mint mark is, in truth, a triple punched mint mark variety. The original mint marks were all placed too high, or stated differently, too close to the date. In order to correct this, the mint mark was then repunched further down south, only the second placing was still too far north, so a third yet was necessitated. The result is a very clear triple punched mint mark variety where the upper and lower curls of the initial S are still seen, as well as the second punching, which is placed neatly in between. For this variety, 2017 saw a PCGS graded coin with an MS66 red graded coin sell at auction for the sum of $305. And then in the number 7 slot, we discover the first overmint mark variety on this list, in the form of the 1952 D over S coin. Here, an S was first placed onto the die for the San Francisco Mint, but then it was subsequently overstruck with a D mint mark for the Denver Mint instead. The new D mint mark was also placed slightly offset and to the north as well, leaving the remnant of the original S towards the south. You'd be forgiven for thinking that this might be a D over D variety instead, upon first glance at least, but with closer examination, it will be revealed that this is in fact the lower curl of an S that can be seen here instead. In 2019, a PCGS graded MS65 red 1952 D over S Lincoln penny like this one was sold at auction for $264. 1959 was naturally a transitional year for the Lincoln penny, as the new memorial design was first introduced into circulation. And just so does 1959 represent the first double die variety to appear on this list. This double die obverse coin is an example of class 2 doubling, with the place of interest on this coin being the date. Separation lines can be seen in the 5 and both 9s of the date. Due to the nature of the doubling here, an earlier die state coin would be more desirable, as later die states the doubling does fade, and the only real evidence that remains is the fact that the numbers are slightly thicker than they really should be, which admittedly is quite a bit harder to diagnose. During 2018, an NGC graded example with an MS66 red grade was sold at auction for no less than $600. Now, you'd remember that we started this list with a 1956D repunched mint mark variety. Well, at the halfway point, we are back at it yet again, with another 1956 D over D variety. Now, yes, it is true that this issue has several repunched mint marks to choose from, but by far the best one has to be the coin pictured here, featuring a repunched mint mark so bold that it could be spotted with the naked eye, if your eyesight is good enough, granted. The D is doubled completely towards the southwest, with almost every detail affected, from the straight bar of the D to the left, and even the rounding of the initial D can be seen inside the cavity of the final mint mark as well. During 2017, an MS67 red graded example of this variety coin from PCGS was sold at auction for $1,293. Another variety comes to us, again from 1955, but it is not the extremely well-known one that might immediately spring to mind. This is the double die obverse variety for the 1955 D coin from the Denver Mint. Unlike its more famous cousin from the Philadelphia Mint, which we'll get to in just a while, this coin's doubling is more isolated. Specifically, you'll want to look at the date, where almost the entire 1 and mostly the head of the 9 shows doubling towards the west. In addition to this, Lincoln's eye should also be nicely doubled towards the east, or towards the right of the design, as it were. In 2018, a PCGS graded coin with a grade of MS66 plus red was sold at auction for $1,140. In the number 3 position, we go back to the beginning of the decade and find an over mint mark variety for 1951. The 1951 D over S coin. Those of you that have been watching this channel for a while may already be aware that there are actually 2 D over S mark varieties for this date, but for the purposes of this list, I'll only discuss the better known of those 2. The top loop of the S can be seen peeking out from behind the D towards the top, just below the D's top serif. Then, towards the bottom of the D, we can also see the lower serif of the original S mint mark just barely peeking out from underneath the middle of the straight bar of the D. In an earlier die state example, you can even see a faint tracing of the lower curve of the S at this position as well. During the 2018 October Baltimore coin auction, a coin like this with a grade of MS67 red from PCGS was sold at auction for $1,440. And now for the proverbial big guns. The 1955 double die obverse penny is surely one of, if not the most famous of variety coins. Period. The classic class 1 doubling on this coin is simply spectacular, and I'm sure that at least some people might have expected this coin to be in the number 1 position on this list. Well, more on that in just a bit. The spread on this coin is so strong that every last letter of Liberty, as well as In God We Trust, achieves complete separation. The date, too, is doubled to unmistakable effect, and can easily be spotted with the naked eye. Other design elements are also affected, with Lincoln's lapel being the most noticeable of these. With the evergreen popularity of this coin, it should come as very little surprise that in 2018, an MS65 red graded coin from PCGS was sold at auction for $114,000. And then, in the top position, there is no doubt that the enigmatic 1958 double die obverse Lincoln cent reigns supreme. While it is true that the 1955 double die obverse is more popular and certainly more obtainable as well, the 1958 coin is by far the scarcer and the more mysterious of the 2 as well. To date, only 3 such coins have come to light, and the variety was only brought to the attention of the collecting public at large by as late a date as 1983. Of the 3 examples that are known, one is graded as MS65 and the other 2 as MS64 red. Strong doubling can be seen in a clockwise rotation on the lettering of both Liberty as well as In God We Trust, characterizing this variety coin with far less severe doubling on the date as well. In 2018, during the sale of the ESM collection in Baltimore, one of the MS64 red coins graded by PCGS was brought to auction, where it managed to raise $336,000. $1,000. Let me know if your favorite penny variety made this list in the comments below, and feel free to check out the other videos from this series as well. Subscribe to WNN and activate notifications with the bell icon so you'll know when new videos are released. For the World Numismatic News, I am Numisman saying thank you for watching, keep collecting, and have a great day.